Hello. Today I'm going to take a topic on the statistical methods for data evaluation. And in that, the topic is hypothesis testing. So let us understand what do you mean by that hypothesis testing, a brief introduction about it. Now, coming to what do you mean by hypothesis testing, this is a very important topic as concerned to students who are further pursuing BCA or let's say BTech course or going for post-graduation. And this is a basic concept for machine learning also. So this is the basic concept of hypothesis testing is to form an assertion and test it with the data set. And if we go for a formal definition, it says that it is a form of statistical inference that uses data from the samples drawn to draw the conclusion or to derive the conclusion about a population's parameter. That parameter could be mean, that could be a standard deviation or a variance. That is, it is used to infer a result of a hypothesis performed on a sample data from a larger population. And when performing hypothesis test, the common assumption is that there is no difference between the samples taken. Moving ahead, let us understand what are the different types of hypothesis before we go for testing of the hypothesis. There are two types of hypothesis. One is null hypothesis, the other is alternate hypothesis, as we can see in this picture. For example, let's say suppose if, let us take an example and understand. If the task is to identify the effect of a medicine or a drug A compared to drug B on some patients, the null hypothesis and the alternate hypothesis would be this. How do we write? So the notation for writing the null hypothesis is H0 and the alternate hypothesis is HA or H1. So the null hypothesis, we stated first that drug A and drug B have the same effect on the patients, and the alternate of it will be drug A has a greater effect than drug B on patients, or we can write drug B has a greater effect than drug A on patients. So if we see this example, we know that how do we write a null and alternate hypothesis. First, we have to frame the null hypothesis. Then we have to write the alternate hypothesis, right? And the notation is null hypothesis written by H0 or H0 and alternate written by HA or H1. So if we go by the formal definition, we have seen the example now. Formal definition says that null hypothesis, it is therein there's no significant difference between the population specified in the experiments or due to any experimental or sampling error. It is denoted by H0. An alternate hypothesis, the simple observations are influenced by some random cause. It is denoted by H0. Okay, now see this example. If we write, this is a purely a typical example. And going by this, if we read the example here, we can see that the null hypothesis is written that there is no significant difference between the lifetime of sample and population. Because for hypothesis testing, we take the samples and we make the test on the samples so as to derive a conclusion on the population. So that is the main basic base of hypothesis testing. So if we go for the revision part, it is again a repeat. A statistical hypothesis is an assertion concerning or involving one or more populations. Hypothesis testing is a process of testing of the significance regarding the parameters of the population on the basis of the samples drawn from it. And it enables us to make the probability statements about the population parameter. Now, there are two types of errors in hypothesis testing. It is type 1 error and type 2 error. You can see we can make a table of it by looking at the table. Type 1 error is wherein we make a decision wherein we are rejecting the null hypothesis when after testing the null hypothesis comes out to be true. And type 2 errors, the type 2 errors occur when we accept the null hypothesis as the decision, but in fact the null hypothesis came as false. So when a null hypothesis is tested, because that is the base for testing, there are four possible outcomes as we see in this particular table. Now coming to the next basic topic, that is a level of significance. What do you mean by level of significance is the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true. That is the maximum allowable probability of making the type 1 errors. And it is denoted by Greek letter alpha. Okay. And the commonly used levels of significance are 10%, 5%, and 1%. And confidence level is again related to level of significance. That is the probability of accepting the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true. And it is denoted by 1 minus alpha. So if we can see what is the confidence level for each of the level of significance. And these are the three standard level of significance which are allowed in hypothesis testing. Hope so you understood the crux of, or not the crux, the base of hypothesis testing. What does it mean? About what are the two types of hypothesis, what are the types of errors, the confidence level, and the level of significance. These are the basic topics we start with when we go for making the students understand about what is hypothesis and hypothesis testing when they go for research purposes and all. Thank you.